Everything that we do affects climate change, and everything around us is impacted by climate change. From individuals to big corporations, every small decision counts. And at such a time, a Bangalore-based company, StepChange, is helping organizations with their carbon footprint reduction related decisions. And one of them is tackling plastic pollution. To discuss this in detail, we're in conversation with Dr. Sidhant Pai, who's the co-founder and chief science officer at StepChange. Thank you so much, Sidhant, for taking out time and speaking to me.
Thank you for having me.
Sidhant, this year's theme for World Environment Day is to beat plastic pollution. And nearly 170 countries agreed to develop a first draft of the global treaty to fight plastic pollution. As a climate scientist, how significant do you think this move is, and what can we expect out of this treaty?
So it's significant in that plastic pollution has a wide-ranging global footprint. Plastic pollution also has a lot of climate impact, specifically, in addition to the other impacts that it has. And these impacts are not constrained to any one nation's boundaries. And so having some sort of global treaty is definitely a step in the right direction, particularly given the importance of global supply chains in our modern world. A net zero plastic solution almost certainly requires global cooperation. It does remain to be seen what the first draft will cover, but the UN EP, which hosted some of these talks, actually released a blueprint detailing out how we can reduce plastic waste by about 80% by 2040. There are a few kind of key areas of action, including developing more ability to recycle some of this plastic, reducing plastic production via the use of alternative materials, as well as just reusing the plastic. So, I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. But that said, I think it's also important for nations to take individual action at the nation state level that are bespoke to kind of their own economies.
Absolutely. Sidhant, where do you think India stands in this battle against plastic pollution? The country, for example, announced a ban on single-use plastic last year in July. But all of us know, and we can see that these plastic items are very much in circulation. Do you think we'll be able to fight this menace?
Yeah, so India, I think took an admirable step banning a variety of single-use plastic items. But the problem is a lot of the vendors that actually help distribute some of these items don't currently have access to cost-effective alternatives.
Absolutely.
And then the margins involved in the underlying products that are sold are also quite tight. Right. And there's also limited guidance / enforcement around these regulations. So it's a move in the right direction, but a lot of problematic single-use plastic, such as plastic water bottles and things like that, are not covered currently. I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done in this space and a lot more support that needs to be provided to actually ensure that transition.
I think you made a very crucial point there, because whenever we talk about shunning plastic, one common concern is that there is no affordable alternative in the market, which is why people are sort of forced to use plastic. I also want to know, recently a study said that recycling plastic is actually leading to a lot of microplastics entering into the environment. So is recycling not the way to go? I
mean, I don't know if I would say recycling is not the way to go. I think we need to be thoughtful about how we view recycling as part of, one part of this broader solution. I think ultimately, as I was mentioning earlier, in order to hit net zero plastic, we do need to reduce / eliminate the production of new plastic, or at least problematic plastics. And so cost-effective alternatives would definitely make this a lot easier. So, investing in, packaging solutions around glass, paper, cardboard, fiber, cloth, and even compostable plastics, right? There are different types of plastics. So, for example, multi-layered plastics are particularly problematic because they're very difficult to actually process. So thinking about kind of what we produce is definitely, I'd say the most important part of this process. But recycling will play and does play a huge role. I think we just have to be a little thoughtful about how we view it as part of this broader solution.
Right. A recent report also found that 20 firms, when I say firms, global firms, produce 55% of the world's plastic waste. So how is StepChange helping big corporations reduce their usage of plastic materials and explore more sustainable alternatives?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great point. So, I mean, large corporations that operate in the space have
Yeah,
an incredible opportunity to have an impact.
yeah, definitely.
And StepChange helps such companies reduce their usage and production of plastics by developing bespoke tools that enable these companies to account for their plastic footprint, set achievable targets to reduce this footprint, and also explore cost benefit scenarios of moving to more sustainable alternatives.
Right.
And these cost benefits are powered by our specialized life cycle assessment tools that allow companies to understand the kind of cradle to grave impacts associated with their services and product offerings. So we've now, for example, worked with some of the largest FMCG companies in India,
Right.
and when we've used LCAs as a way to kind of help them get a quantitative sense of the impact of their product. And just to be clear, this is across multiple environmental metrics, not just plastic,
Yeah.
so that they can take kind of a holistic view as they think about kind of sustainable product development.
Right.
And we hope to continue working with some of these companies to reduce their plastic footprints, as well as their other footprints, across carbon, air pollution, water, etc.
Right. So, what are the challenges of transitioning to net zero and adopting these sustainable practices? And do you think these climate decisions that we're talking about, do you think they are a priority for corporations in India?
So see, ultimately there is, as I was mentioning earlier, there is no kind of net zero plastic solution unless we significantly reduce or eliminate plastic production.
Right.
So that should definitely be kind of the overarching goal.
Okay.
In the interim, I think we can think about prioritizing the reduction of particularly problematic materials, such as multi-layered plastics, for example, as well as thinking about low-hanging fruit in terms of, consumer goods and things like that, that have already existing kind of alternatives that we might be able to leverage. So, for example, thinking about more sustainable packaging materials and things like that,
Yeah.
as opposed to using plastics in the way that we do today. I think in our discussions with large corporations, a lot of companies are now thinking very seriously about these issues and starting to invest in solutions. It's still early days, but I think a lot of companies are starting to kind of see the market-based risks and opportunities associated with either being sustainable or not being sustainable. And so I think a lot of future focused companies that are thinking about future proofing their business plans are actually thinking about setting concrete goals that are achievable, because ultimately they expect that their sustainability metrics will impact their bottom lines in the future.
Yeah. When we talk about India, Sidhant, what do you think has worked in favor of the country when we talk about tackling plastic pollution, and what do you think has worked against us?
So India is a very large and heterogeneous country, right? So unfortunately, there is no kind of single silver bullet to this problem.
Yeah.
I think what we have going for us is that most Indians are very conscious about waste and attempt to kind of just culturally prevent unnecessary consumption and waste. That said, there is a need for a lot more just social and physical infrastructure around waste management and waste management practices. Just for example, communicating to people why littering is bad, but then also building the physical infrastructure to enable kind of effective capture of these problematic materials. We also need to invest simultaneously, though, in regulatory and market-based incentives at the production side. So this could include kind of EPR type policies and things like that. That would incentivize companies to move away from plastic production, as we mentioned earlier. So I think ultimately, making cost-effective alternatives to plastic ubiquitous is the best approach to tackling this issue.
Right. Do you think there's enough awareness when it comes to plastic pollution in a country like India?
I'd say yes and no. What is our decision-making capability, right? So I think it's one thing to kind of understand that plastics are problematic. And I think, frankly, a lot of people understand that, right?
Yeah.
But then ultimately, when it comes down to it, both at kind of the corporate level as well as at the individual level, what is our decision-making capability in terms of choosing an alternative, right? Like, so in other words, if I'm really thirsty and I'm in a city that I don't know and I'm walking down the street, is there an is there an alternative to a plastic water bottle?
Yeah, a
And
trustworthy
if
alternative.
exactly, and if the answer is no, or if the answer is that it is, particularly difficult or challenging for me to access that alternative,
Yeah.
then my kind of abstract notion of plastic being problematic isn't as relevant to the decision that I'm making.
Yeah.
And so I think, for sure there's a lot more communication and just in general, there are best practices that can be built around the way that we think about waste in India. For sure, there's no doubting that. But I also think that it goes hand in hand with building out the kind of infrastructure required to actually make more sustainable decisions.
Right. I also want to mention that what StepChange is doing is really inspiring in the space of sustainability and climate action. But I also want to understand, what is the mission and what is it that you want to achieve in the next few years?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think actually just building on what we just said, what we just talked about, I think the way that we think about the value that StepChange provides is the ability for these large companies to make informed decisions, basically giving them the tools and building the sustainability models, the cost benefit models, the scenario planning models for these large companies to actually take informed decisions,
Right.
In a way that moves the needle in terms of their corporate sustainability. So I think I'd say our core mission is to build science-based decision-making tools for these companies. And as I was mentioning earlier, not just for plastic, but across air pollution, carbon emissions, water use, etc.
Right. And I think that is the way forward. I wish you all the best, and I'd like to thank you again for taking out time and speaking to me.
Thank you so much.